The morning Jake discovered the crash site, the Nevada desert was painted in shades of copper and gold by the rising sun. As a structural engineer for Henderson Construction, he was supposed to be surveying the remote valley for a potential mining operation. Instead, he found himself staring at something that shouldn't exist. The craft was massive, easily the size of a city block, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly iridescence that shifted between deep purple and silver as clouds passed overhead. It had carved a furrow through the desert floor that stretched for nearly a mile, coming to rest against a cluster of red rock formations that had crumbled under the impact. Steam still rose from various points along its surface, and the air hummed with residual energy that made Jake's teeth ache. He should have called it in immediately, should have contacted his supervisor, the authorities, someone, but something about the scene held him transfixed. The ship's design was both alien and strangely familiar, its curves and angles following principles of engineering that his mind recognized even as his eyes struggled to process them. It was beautiful in a way that transcended mere aesthetics, speaking to something fundamental about the marriage of form and function. Jake approached cautiously, his work boots crunching on the crystallized sand that surrounded the vessel. The heat radiating from the hull was intense but not unbearable, and he could see what appeared to be damage along the starboard side. Massive tears in the metal revealed glimpses of the interior, where sparks occasionally flashed in the darkness. As he circled the ship, documenting everything with his phone despite knowing the images would never capture the true magnitude of what he was seeing, Jake noticed movement near what he assumed was the main hull breach. A figure emerged from the shadows within, moving with obvious difficulty. The being that crawled out of the wreckage was unmistakably female in form, though clearly not human. She was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with skin that held a faint luminescent quality and hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her clothing, or what remained of it, was made of materials that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury, though torn and scorched from the crash. When their eyes met across the debris field, Jake felt something shift in the world around him. Her gaze was ancient and weary, holding depths that spoke of responsibilities beyond his comprehension. Yet there was also desperation there, and hope flickering like a candle in a storm. She spoke, and though the words were in no language he recognized, their meaning crashed into his mind with startling clarity. The universal translator embedded in her neural cortex was still functioning, though damaged like everything else. Please, the words formed in his thoughts, carrying with them emotional undertones of exhaustion and determination. My ship, it must be repaired. The fate of my people depends on it. Jake found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. Who are you? What are you? I am Empress of the Dominion of Eternal Stars. My fleet was ambushed by the Devourer swarm in the Andromeda Spiral. This vessel, it carries the last hope for my civilization. The weight of her words settled over Jake like a physical thing. An empress from another galaxy, and somehow, impossibly, she was asking him for help. I'm just an engineer, he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he was studying the visible damage with a professional eye. I work with concrete and steel, not whatever this is made of. Attempted to stand but stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her. Jake moved without thinking, catching her before she could fall. Her skin was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with an inner rhythm, like a heartbeat but more complex. The principles are the same, she said, her mental voice growing weaker. Structure, support, energy flow, your mind. I can sense it. You understand systems, how things work together. The ship's repair protocols were damaged in the crash, but with your knowledge of engineering principles. She trailed off, her eyes rolling back as consciousness threatened to leave her. Jake realized with growing alarm that she was dying. Whatever injuries she had sustained in the crash were beyond his ability to treat. Wait, he said urgently. What do you need me to do? How can I help? His eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with obvious effort. Inside the ship, the central core chamber, the heart of stars, it powers everything, but the quantum matrices are destabilized. Your understanding of load distribution, of how to balance forces. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. Please, I made a vow to my people that I would return, that I would save them from the Devourers. Jake looked at the massive tear in the ship's hull, then back at the dying alien empress in his arms. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that he was hallucinating, that alien empresses didn't crash in the Nevada desert and ask construction engineers to fix their starships. but the weight in his arms was real, the heat from the ship was real, and the desperation in his eyes was the most real thing he had ever seen. "Okay," he heard himself say, "tell me what to do." The smile that crossed his face was like watching the sun rise. "There is an emergency medical bay near the core chamber. If you can get me there, the automated systems can stabilize my injuries. Then I can guide you through the repairs." Jake scooped her up properly, surprised by how light she felt despite her height. Her technology might be beyond his understanding, but the basic principles of first aid were universal. Get the patient to medical attention, then worry about everything else. The interior of the ship was a maze of corridors that seemed to bend and flow around them as they moved. The walls were covered in what looked like circuitry, but organic somehow, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that provided the only illumination. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting strange shadows that danced at the edges of Jake's vision. Directed him through a series of turns that should have been impossible given the ship's exterior dimensions, but Jake had long since given up trying to apply normal logic to the situation. The medical bay, when they reached it, was a circular chamber filled with equipment that hummed and sparkled with contained energy. "Place me on the central dais," instructed, her mental voice growing stronger as they approached the medical equipment. "The bioscanners will assess my condition and begin treatment automatically." Jake lowered her onto what appeared to be a bed made of the same flowing material as her clothes. Immediately, tendrils of light emerged from the platform, washing over her body in patterns that reminded him of the way ground-penetrating radar mapped subsurface structures. The air filled with a harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in his bones. "The treatment will take several hours," said, her voice already sounding clearer. "But I can project my consciousness to guide you while my body heals. The core chamber is 3 levels down through the central access shaft. Be warned. The ship's defenses may still be active. They will recognize you as an unknown entity." "Defenses?" Jake asked, but's eyes had already closed, her breathing settling into the deep rhythm of induced healing sleep. He was on his own. The central access shaft proved to be a vertical tunnel that stretched both above and below his current position. Strange symbols glowed along the walls, and Jake could feel a subtle vibration that suggested massive machinery operating somewhere in the ship's depths. He found what appeared to be a lift platform and stepped onto it cautiously. The descent was smooth and silent, the walls of the shaft flowing past like water. Jake tried to estimate the distance they traveled, but the shifting patterns of light made it impossible to judge. When the platform finally stopped, he found himself facing a corridor that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "Can you hear me?" His voice suddenly filled his mind, clearer than before. "Yeah," Jake said aloud, then felt foolish talking to empty air. "You need not speak aloud. Simply think your response clearly, and I will perceive it." Jake concentrated on forming a coherent thought. "Can you hear this?" "Perfectly. You have a remarkably focused mind. Now proceed straight ahead. The corridor will lead you to the core chamber, but be prepared. The ship's bioneural network is damaged and may react unpredictably to your presence." Jake walked forward, his footsteps echoing strangely in the enclosed space. The walls here were different from those above, covered in what looked like living tissue that pulsed with veins of light. As he progressed, he began to notice tendrils emerging from the walls, tracking his movement like the sensory organs of some vast organism. "The ship is alive, isn't it?" he asked. "In a sense, our technology merges the mechanical with the biological. The ship's consciousness is currently dormant due to the damage, but its instincts remain active. It knows you do not belong here." As if responding to her words, the tendrils began to move more aggressively, reaching toward Jake with obvious intent. He pressed himself against the center of the corridor, trying to stay out of their reach, but they were growing longer and more numerous. "They're getting closer," he thought urgently. "Remain calm. The ship can sense emotion through bioelectric fields. Fear will trigger its defensive responses. Think of yourself as part of the repair process, as someone who belongs there." Jake took a deep breath and tried to project confidence and purpose. The tendrils hesitated, their movements becoming less aggressive. One of them brushed against his hand, and for a moment he felt a strange sensation, as if the ship was tasting him, analyzing his intent. The tendril and the others followed suit, retreating into the walls. The passage ahead brightened, and Jake felt a subtle shift in the air pressure that suggested he was being granted access. "Well done," his voice carried a note of approval. "The ship has accepted you as a repair technician. You should have no further difficulties reaching the core." The corridor ended at a massive circular door that dilated open as Jake approached. Beyond lay a chamber that took his breath away. The room was spherical, with no obvious floor or ceiling, though Jake found himself standing on a walkway that extended toward the center, where a massive crystalline structure pulsed with contained starlight. "The Heart of Stars," explained. "It contains a miniaturized stellar core sustained by quantum field manipulations. The entire ship draws its power from that single point of controlled fusion." Jake stared at the impossible structure, his engineer's mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The crystal was easily 20 feet across, suspended in a web of energy conduits that stretched to every surface of the sphere. But several of those conduits were dark, and the crystal's light flickered irregularly. "The quantum matrices," Jake said, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're like support beams for the energy flow." "Precisely. When the ship crashed, the structural shock disrupted the field alignments. The matrices are attempting to compensate, but without proper calibration, the entire core will collapse within hours. And when that happens..." Jake didn't need her to finish. A stellar core, even a miniaturized one, would release enough energy to turn half of Nevada into a crater. But looking at the damaged system, he could see the problem. It was like looking at a building where several load-bearing walls had been compromised. The remaining structure was carrying more weight than it was designed for. "I need to redistribute the energy load," he said, moving closer to examine the connection points. "Reroute the flow through the undamaged matrices while I figure out how to repair the broken ones. The control interface should respond to your bioelectric field now that the ship has accepted you. Place your hand on the primary node." Jake approached a section of the walkway where a glowing panel had emerged from the floor. The moment his palm made contact, the chamber exploded with information. Holographic displays materialized around him, showing energy flow patterns, structural stress points, and system status indicators that somehow made perfect sense despite being entirely alien in origin. He could see the problem now, mapped out in 3 dimensions before him. The energy from the stellar core flowed through 12 primary matrices arranged in a complex geometric pattern. 4 of them were completely offline, their connections severed by the crash impact. The remaining 8 were overloading, their crystalline structures beginning to show stress fractures. "It's like a suspension bridge," Jake muttered, his hands moving across the control interfaces with growing confidence. "If some of the cables break, the others have to carry more load, but there's a limit to how much stress they can take." Working with methodical precision, Jake began rerouting energy flows away from the most damaged matrices. It was like performing surgery on a living system, requiring him to balance dozens of variables simultaneously. Too much energy through any one matrix would cause it to overload and explode. Too little, and the stellar core would lose stability. As he worked, Jake found himself falling into the familiar rhythm of complex problem-solving. This was what he loved about engineering, the way that seemingly impossible challenges could be broken down into manageable components. The technology was alien, but the underlying principles were universal. Force, stress, distribution, balance, these concepts transcended species and galaxies. Hours passed, though Jake lost track of time as he became increasingly absorbed in the work. The control interface seemed to anticipate his needs, providing tools and displays that matched his thought patterns. Gradually, the energy flows stabilized, the remaining matrices settling into a sustainable configuration. "Remarkable," his voice carried tones of awe and gratitude. "You have accomplished in hours what would have taken my engineers days. The core is stable, but the damaged matrices must still be repaired for full functionality." Jake stepped back from the controls, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The broken ones, can they be fixed?" "Not with conventional methods. The quantum crystals that form their core must be at the molecular level. It requires a process that..." She paused. "That requires a sacrifice I am not certain you would be willing to make." "What kind of sacrifice?" "The regrowth process must be guided by a living consciousness. The person conducting the repair becomes temporarily linked to the ship's bioneural network. For my people, this is a sacred duty that only trained technicians undertake. But for you, an alien mind." The process could be dangerous, potentially fatal. Jake looked at the flickering crystal at the heart of the chamber, then at the readings showing the stress on the remaining matrices. Without repairs, the temporary fix wouldn't last. Eventually, the overloaded systems would fail and the stellar core would destabilize. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Perhaps 18 hours before cascade failure becomes inevitable." Jake nodded slowly. 18 hours to decide whether to risk his life for an alien empress he'd known for less than a day. The rational choice was obvious: contact the authorities, let them deal with it, and hope they could evacuate the area in time. But as he stood in that impossible chamber, surrounded by technology that represented the pinnacle of an ancient civilization's achievement, Jake found that rational choices seemed less important than right ones. Had spoken of a vow to her people, of responsibility that transcended personal safety. Looking at the stellar fire contained within the crystal heart, Jake realized that some vows were worth keeping, even when they weren't your own. Jake spent the next several hours exploring the ship whilst Body underwent healing protocols in the medical bay. Her consciousness remained active, guiding him through the vessel's labyrinthine passages and explaining the functions of various systems. What he discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about engineering and physics. The ship wasn't just a vehicle, it was an ecosystem. The bioneural networks that ran through its walls were part of a living symbiosis between organic and mechanical components. The hull itself was grown rather than constructed, its crystalline matrix capable of self-repair under normal circumstances. Even the gravity that kept Jake's feet on the floor was generated not by spinning sections or mechanical systems, but by fields that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality. "Your people built all this?" Jake asked as they stood in what called the navigation nexus, a chamber where star charts floated in three-dimensional displays that stretched to infinity. "Built is not the correct term," his mental voice carried tones of pride mixed with sorrow. "We grew it, shaped it, convinced it to become what we needed. Our civilization learned long ago that the universe responds better to cooperation than domination." Jake studied the star maps, trying to comprehend the vast distances they represented. Entire galaxies were reduced to points of light, connected by lines that showed navigation routes spanning millions of light years. "How long have your people been spacefaring?" "We achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 50,000 years ago, by your planet's chronological standards. We have been exploring the cosmic deep for longer than your species has existed." The weight of that statement settled over Jake like a physical presence. 50,000 years of technological advancement, of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. And yet here was their empress, trapped on a primitive world, dependent on a human engineer who still used slide rules when his calculator batteries died. "Tell me about the Devourer swarm," Jake said. "What exactly are you running from?" The star map shifted, zooming in on a section of the Andromeda galaxy. What Jake saw there made his blood run cold. Entire star systems were dark, their light extinguished, with only empty voids marking where civilizations once thrived. "They are not truly alive in any sense we understand," explained. "The swarm is a self-replicating force of entropy, consuming matter and energy to create more of itself. They do not communicate, do not negotiate, do not show mercy. They simply devour everything in their path." "How did they find your people?" "We do not know. They emerged from the void between galaxies, sweeping through our outer colonies like a plague of darkness. By the time we understood the true nature of the threat, half our territory was already lost." Jake watched as the display showed the swarm's advancement through the galaxy, a wave of destruction that consumed everything it touched. "You said this ship carries hope for your people. What did you mean?" "The quantum matrices in the heart of stars are not just power sources. They contain compressed spatial dimensions pocket universes where we have managed to evacuate the survivors of our civilization. Nearly 1 billion souls exist within the crystal structure you stabilized, suspended in temporal stasis until we can find them a new home." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. 1 billion people, an entire civilization compressed into the crystalline heart he had been working on just hours before. The responsibility of it was staggering. "And if the matrices fail, those pocket dimensions will collapse. 1 billion lives will be extinguished in an instant." His mental voice carried the weight of unimaginable grief. "I am the last of my people who remains conscious, who can still act to save them. That is the vow I made as their empress, that I would not rest until they were safe. Jake found himself studying the displays with new urgency, looking for any clue about how to complete the repairs. You mentioned that fixing the damaged matrices requires someone to link with the ship's bio-neural network. What does that actually involve? The quantum crystals must be at the molecular level, but the process cannot be automated. It requires conscious guidance to ensure the new matrices are properly integrated with the ship's systems. The technician's nervous system becomes temporarily merged with the ship's bio-neural network, allowing them to direct the regrowth process from within. Temporarily. Under normal circumstances, yes, the link can be severed once the repairs are complete. But you are human, not of our species. Our bio-neural networks evolved alongside our physiology over millions of years for an alien mind to interface directly. She paused. The neural feedback could cause permanent damage or death. Jake absorbed this information silently, watching the star maps cycle through views of empty space where civilizations once thrived. How long would the process take? 6 to 8 hours for each matrix. With 4 matrices requiring repair, perhaps 30 hours of continuous neural interface. And you can't do it yourself. My injuries are too severe. The bioneural link requires perfect neural coherence, and the medical systems indicate that my cognitive functions are currently operating at only 60% capacity. An error during the regrowth process could cause catastrophic failure of the entire core. Jake nodded slowly, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Show me exactly what the process involves. Over the next hour, guided him to the ship's engineering section, where the quantum matrix fabrication systems were located. The chamber was smaller than the core, but even more alien in its configuration. Organic-looking machinery lined the walls, with neural interface pods positioned at strategic points throughout the room. The technician enters the interface pod, explained as they approached a structure that looked disturbingly like a mechanical womb. Bioneural filaments establish connections with the major nerve cluster's brain, spine, and peripheral nervous system. The consciousness then becomes part of the ship's awareness, able to perceive and manipulate matter at the quantum level. Jake examined the pod's interior, noting the countless hair-thin filaments that would presumably penetrate his skin to establish the neural connections. And while this is happening, I would be aware of it. Completely aware, but your perception would be expanded beyond normal human limitations. You would exist simultaneously as yourself and as part of the ship's consciousness. Many describe the experience as the closest thing to true transcendence our technology can provide. And the chance of survival. For one of my people, nearly 100% for a human mind. His mental voice carried reluctant honesty. Perhaps 40%, 50 at best. Jake stared at the interface pod, its alien curves reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent lighting. 50-50 odds of survival to save 1 billion lives. In the abstract, it seemed like an obvious choice. But standing there, looking at the mechanism that might kill him, the mathematics felt less compelling. There has to be another way, he said finally. I have been searching for alternatives since the moment I realized the extent of the damage. The Eternal Dominion's greatest minds spent centuries developing this technology. If there were a safer method, we would have discovered it. Jake walked around the chamber, studying the various systems with his engineer's eye. What if we didn't repair all 4 matrices at once? Could the ship operate with fewer? 2 matrices would provide minimal functionality enough for basic life support and simple repairs. 3 would allow for limited faster-than-light capability. But with less than 4, the pocket dimensions containing my people cannot be sustained indefinitely. Eventually, cascade resonance would cause them to collapse. How long would they remain stable with 3 matrices? Perhaps 6 months, a year at the absolute maximum. Jake seized on this. That's time. Time to find another solution to contact your people's allies to develop safer repair methods. What allies? His mental voice carried bitter despair. The swarm has consumed everything in our galaxy that was capable of rendering aid. We are alone, Jake. The last survivors of a civilization that spanned 1 million worlds, dependent entirely on the goodwill of a species that has barely begun to explore its own solar system. The accusation stung, partly because it was true. Humanity had been spacefaring for less than a century, had never ventured beyond their own moon, had no faster-than-light technology or understanding of quantum mechanics at the level people took for granted. By any reasonable measure, they were primitives being asked to repair technology that bordered on magic. But as Jake studied the interface pod, another thought began to form. You said the process requires conscious guidance because it can't be automated. But what if it could be partially automated? What if I could establish the neural link for short periods, guide the initial stages of regrowth, then disconnect while the ship's systems completed the work? The quantum matrices require continuous oversight during formation. Any interruption in the process would result in structural instabilities that would make the matrix useless. Continuous oversight, yes, but does it have to be continuous neural interface? Jake's mind was racing now, approaching the problem from a different angle. I'm looking at this like a construction project. When we pour a large concrete foundation, we don't have one person oversee the entire process. We set up monitoring systems, establish checkpoints, divide the work into manageable phases. His consciousness seemed to focus more intently on his thoughts. Explain this approach. Break the regrowth process into smaller segments. I establish the neural link, guide the quantum crystal formation for a specific phase, then disconnect while the ship's automated systems maintain that configuration. Rest, recover, then reconnect for the next phase. The bioneural interface is not designed for repeated connections. Each time the filaments establish contact with your nervous system, there would be additional trauma. Multiple connections might actually increase the danger. Jake nodded, acknowledging the point. But it would also reduce the duration of each connection, give my brain time to recover between sessions. And if something went wrong during one phase, it wouldn't necessarily compromise the entire matrix. He could feel considering the proposal, her ancient mind examining it from angles he couldn't even comprehend. It is theoretically possible. The ship's bioneural networks could be programmed to maintain quantum coherence during the disconnection periods, but it would require precision beyond anything our technicians have ever attempted. How many phases would we need? For optimal safety margins, perhaps 12 phases per matrix, 48 total connections, each lasting approximately 30 minutes. Jake did the calculations in his head. 24 hours of neural interface spread across multiple sessions, with recovery time between each connection. It was still incredibly dangerous, but it felt more manageable than 30 continuous hours. And the success rate? Unknown, this has never been attempted, but theoretically, perhaps 70% survival probability, possibly higher if your nervous system adapts well to the interface. 70%? Still not great odds, but significantly better than the 50-50 chance of the conventional approach. Jake found himself nodding before he'd consciously made the decision. Let's do it. Jake, you must understand what you are agreeing to. Even if you survive the process, you will never be the same. The neural interface leaves permanent changes in consciousness. You would carry memories and perceptions that no human brain was designed to contain. Will I still be me? Yes, but expanded, enhanced. You would perceive reality in ways that few beings in the universe ever experience. Some consider it a gift, others find it too much to bear. Jake thought about the star maps showing the swarms advance, about the billion lives suspended in quantum crystal matrices, about the ancient empress who had carried the weight of her people's survival across the vast emptiness between galaxies. When do we start? His presence in his mind carried gratitude too profound for words. The medical bay indicates that my body will be sufficiently healed within 2 hours. Once I can provide direct assistance, we will begin the first phase. Jake spent those 2 hours studying the interface systems and preparing himself mentally for what was to come. The ship's databases contained detailed information about the neural interface process, though much of it was beyond his comprehension. What he did understand was sobering: the bioneural filaments would penetrate directly into his brain tissue, establishing connections with regions that controlled everything from motor functions to memory formation. When finally emerged from the medical bay, Jake was struck by the transformation in her appearance. The luminescent quality of her skin had been restored, and the tears in her clothing had been replaced by flowing garments that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. She moved with fluid grace that spoke of perfect health, though her eyes still carried the weight of everything she had lost. "You look different," Jake said. The medical systems have not only healed my injuries, but optimized my physiology for the challenges ahead. I will need to be at peak performance to monitor your neural interface and guide the quantum matrix regrowth. She gestured toward the interface pod. Are you ready? Jake looked at the alien machinery that would either save 1 billion lives or kill him in the attempt. As ready as anyone can be for something like this. Then let us begin. The first matrix awaits, and time grows short. The swarm does not pause in its consumption of the universe, and neither can we. The first neural interface session began with Jake lying in the bioneural pod as thousands of hair-thin filaments positioned themselves around his body. Monitored the process from a control station nearby, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed his vital signs and neural activity in real time. Remember, she said, her mental voice calm and reassuring, do not resist the connection. Allow your consciousness to expand naturally. The ship's bioneural network will guide you to the quantum matrix formation chamber. Jake closed his eyes as the filaments began their work, penetrating his skin with sensations that were strange rather than painful. It felt like being gently pricked by thousands of tiny needles, each one carrying a spark of electricity that raced along his nervous system. Then the world exploded into impossible colors and sensations. Jake's consciousness suddenly existed on multiple levels simultaneously. He was still aware of his body in the pod, but he was also something vast and complex, spread throughout the ship's neural networks. He could perceive the flow of energy through quantum conduits, feel the pulse of the stellar core like a heartbeat, sense the billion sleeping minds contained within the pocket dimensions. Breathe, Jake. Do not try to process everything at once. Focus on my voice. His mental guidance became his anchor as his consciousness threatened to fragment under the overwhelming input. Gradually, he learned to filter the sensations, to focus on specific aspects of the ship's awareness while letting others fade into background noise. Good, now allow me to guide you to the first matrix formation chamber. Jake felt his perception shifting, flowing through the ship's neural pathways like water through a complex maze. The quantum matrix chamber materialized around his consciousness, not as a physical space, but as a pattern of forces and possibilities that his enhanced awareness could manipulate directly. The damaged matrix hung before him like a broken crystal sculpture, its quantum structure shattered into fragments that drifted in higher dimensional space. But Jake could see how it was meant to be, could perceive the mathematical elegance that would allow it to channel and focus the stellar core's energy. Begin with the primary resonance nodes, instructed. Shape them slowly, allowing the quantum substrate to follow your conscious intent. Jake reached out with thoughts that had become tools, gently coaxing the scattered quantum fragments back into alignment. It was like solving a three-dimensional puzzle where the pieces existed in 12 dimensions, requiring him to think in ways that would have been impossible without the neural enhancement. The work was exhausting in ways he had never experienced. It wasn't physical fatigue, but something deeper, a draining of the essential energy that made thought possible. Yet as he worked, Jake began to understand the profound elegance of the technology he was repairing. The quantum matrices weren't just power conduits. They were instruments of incredible sophistication, capable of manipulating the fundamental forces of reality itself. Excellent, said as the first phase of regrowth completed. The primary nodes are stable, disconnecting now. The sensation of withdrawal was like being pulled back from the edge of transcendence. Jake's consciousness contracted from the vast complexity of the ship's awareness back into the limited confines of his human brain. The filaments retracted, leaving him gasping in the pod as normal perception reasserted itself. How do you feel? Asked, her concern evident in her mental voice. Jake sat up slowly, testing his coordination and cognitive functions. Everything seemed normal, though he retained vivid memories of perceiving reality from impossible angles. Different, like I've seen something I'm not supposed to remember but can't forget. That sensation will intensify with each interface. Rest now. The next session begins in 4 hours. Over the following days, Jake fell into a rhythm of neural interface sessions separated by periods of rest and recovery. Each connection became easier as his brain adapted to the expanded consciousness, but also more profound as he gained deeper understanding of the ship's systems. During the 6th session, as he worked on the crystalline matrix of the 3rd damaged conduit, Jake made a discovery that changed everything. The pocket dimensions containing people weren't just storage spaces. They were entire miniature universes, complete with artificial stars, planets, and ecosystems. The billion survivors weren't merely suspended in stasis. They were living full lives in accelerated time streams, experiencing months or years for every hour that passed in normal space. "You created entire realities for them," Jake said during a rest period, his mind still reeling from the revelation. It was the only way to preserve not just their lives, but their culture, their relationships, their essential humanity, explained. Each pocket dimension contains a complete ecosystem: cities, countryside, oceans. They know they are refugees, but they can still live, love, create art, raise children. In a sense, our civilization continues even as we search for a new home. Jake thought about the technical challenges involved in creating and maintaining such spaces. The computational requirements alone must be staggering. The quantum matrices handle the calculations by existing partially outside normal spacetime. Each matrix processes reality alterations for approximately 250 million people when 4 matrices are damaged. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Jake with renewed force. He wasn't just repairing a ship's power system. He was maintaining the life support for entire civilizations. By the 8th neural interface session, Jake had begun to notice permanent changes in his perception. Even when disconnected from the ship's networks, he could see energy patterns in everyday objects, understand the quantum relationships that held matter together. His engineering skills had evolved beyond mere technical knowledge into something approaching intuitive understanding of how reality itself was constructed. "Is this what your people experience normally?" he asked during one of their rest periods. "To some degree, yes. Our consciousness evolved to perceive multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. It is one reason we were able to develop such advanced technology. We could see the underlying structure of the universe rather than just its surface appearance." Jake nodded, beginning to understand why humans seemed so primitive to advanced alien civilizations. "We only see 3 dimensions plus time, you see. 12 spatial dimensions, 4 temporal streams, and 6 probability manifolds. Reality is far more complex and beautiful than most species realize." The 9th session brought a new challenge. As Jake worked on the most severely damaged matrix, he encountered quantum structures that seemed to resist repair. The crystal fragments were scattered across multiple dimensional layers, some of them phased partially out of normal spacetime. "I can see them, but I can't reach them," Jake reported during the neural link. "It's like trying to grab something through a mirror." "The crash impact created dimensional shears in the quantum substrate," explained. "Some fragments have been displaced into parallel probability streams. You must learn to extend your consciousness across dimensional boundaries." Is that even possible for a human brain? We are about to discover the limits of human adaptability. With guidance, Jake learned to stretch his consciousness beyond the normal boundaries of spacetime. It was a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced, like reaching through the fabric of reality itself to touch structures that existed in spaces between spaces. The effort was enormous, requiring a level of mental focus that left him exhausted and disoriented. But gradually, he managed to coax the displaced quantum fragments back into normal dimensional space where they could be integrated into the growing matrix structure. "Remarkable," said as they completed the session. "You have accomplished something that would challenge even our most experienced technicians. The matrix is nearly complete." Jake disconnected from the neural interface, feeling fundamentally changed. The expanded consciousness was becoming his new normal, and he found it increasingly difficult to relate to his memories of limited 3-dimensional perception. During the 10th session, something unexpected happened. As Jake worked on the final phases of the 3rd matrix, he became aware of another presence within the ship's neural networks, a vast, ancient intelligence that had been sleeping since the crash. He called out through their mental link, "There's something else here, something watching me." That would be the ship's primary consciousness. The neural trauma from the crash has kept it dormant, but your repair work has begun to restore its higher functions. The sleeping intelligence stirred, and Jake felt its attention focus on him with the weight of eons. When it spoke, its mental voice carried harmonics that suggested vast age and wisdom. "Who dares to touch my dreams?" the ship's consciousness asked. I am Jake, Jake replied, uncertain how to address an intelligent starship. I'm helping Empress repair your quantum matrices. A human? How curious. I am the Eternal Wanderer, and I have sailed between galaxies for 30,000 years. Never have I carried a being of your species within my neural embrace. Jake felt the ship's consciousness examining him, probing the connections between his mind and the bioneural networks. There was no hostility in the examination, but rather a profound curiosity. You perceive reality differently than the ship observed. Your thought patterns are refreshingly chaotic. Where my people see elegant mathematical structures, you see problems to be solved. Where they see harmony, you see opportunities for improvement. Is that bad? Different, potentially useful. Your approach to the matrix repairs shows remarkable innovation. You have accomplished things I would not have thought possible with standard techniques. His voice joined their mental conversation. Eternal Wanderer, your awakening is most welcome. Can you assist with the remaining repairs? I can provide guidance, but the quantum structures still require conscious direction from an external mind. Young must complete what he has begun. The ship's attention focused on Jake again. Are you prepared to continue? The final matrix will be the most challenging, as it interfaces directly with the pocket dimensions containing our passengers. Jake steeled himself for the challenge ahead. What do I need to know? The fourth matrix is not merely a power conduit. It is a gateway between dimensions. Any error in its construction could cause the pocket universes to collapse into normal spacetime. 1 billion lives hang in the balance of your next actions. The weight of that responsibility settled over Jake like a physical thing. He was no longer just repairing alien technology. He was performing surgery on reality itself, with the survival of an entire civilization depending on his steady hands and focused mind. I understand, he said simply. The 11th session began with Jake more deeply connected to the ship's neural networks than ever before. Both and the Eternal Wanderer monitored his progress as he approached the most damaged of the quantum matrices. What he found there even his expanded perception. The matrix hadn't just been broken by the crash, it had been partially converted into something else, its quantum structure corrupted by forces that seemed to exist outside normal spacetime. What am I looking at? Jake asked, studying the twisted remains of what should have been an elegant crystalline structure. Void touch, the ship's consciousness replied, its mental voice carrying tones of ancient fear. The Devourer swarm carries entropy as a weapon. Their attack left traces of reality within my quantum matrices. Jake examined the corruption more closely. It was like looking at spaces where mathematics failed, where the fundamental constants that governed reality had been subtly altered. Can it be repaired? The corruption must be completely removed before any reconstruction can begin, explained. But direct contact with void-touched quantum structures can be dangerous to organic consciousness. The entropy effect can spread to living neural networks. So what's the alternative? There may not be one, the Eternal Wanderer said grimly. If the corruption cannot be removed, this matrix can never be rebuilt. The pocket dimensions will remain unstable, doomed to eventual collapse. Jake studied the corrupted quantum structure, his engineer's mind working through the problem. What if we don't remove the corruption directly? What if we isolate it first, contain it within a stable framework, then work around it? Explain, both and the ship said simultaneously. In construction, if we encounter ground that's too unstable to build on, we don't always try to fix the ground. Sometimes we build a foundation that bridges the unstable area, or we sink pylons down to bedrock. What if we could construct a quantum framework that contained the void-touched areas while allowing the matrix to function normally? The ship's consciousness considered this approach. Theoretically possible, but it would require unprecedented precision. The containment structure would need to be perfect. Any flaw would allow the entropy corruption to spread. Then we build it perfect, Jake said with more confidence than he felt. The work that followed pushed Jake's enhanced consciousness to its absolute limits. He had to construct quantum containment fields while simultaneously preventing them from being corrupted by the very forces they were meant to contain. It was like performing microsurgery while standing in an earthquake. Hour by hour, Jake built the containment structure around each pocket of void-touched quantum material. The work required him to think in ways that no human mind had ever been designed for, manipulating forces that existed beyond the normal boundaries of spacetime. By the time the session ended, Jake had successfully isolated all the corrupted areas within stable containment fields. The matrix was still damaged, but the corruption could no longer spread. "Extraordinary," the Eternal Wanderer said as Jake disconnected from the neural interface. "In 30,000 years of travel, I have never seen void touch contained so elegantly." Jake barely heard the praise. The neural strain had pushed him beyond his limits, and he collapsed in the interface pod as normal consciousness returned. His vision flickered, and for a moment he couldn't remember his own name. Jake was beside him instantly, her medical scanners assessing his condition. "You have pushed too hard, too fast. Your neural pathways are showing signs of severe strain." "The matrix," Jake mumbled. "Is it contained?" "Yes, but at great cost to yourself. You need rest before attempting the final reconstruction." Jake struggled to sit up, his coordination sluggish. "How long do we have?" The ship's consciousness provided the answer. "Approximately 6 hours before cascade failure becomes inevitable. The containment fields you created are stable, but they cannot hold indefinitely against the entropy forces. 6 hours to rest and recover before attempting the most crucial repair of all." Jake closed his eyes, trying to gather his remaining strength for the final session that would either save 1 billion lives or kill him in the attempt. Jake's rest period lasted only 4 hours before alarms began echoing through the ship's corridors. He awakened to find, and the Eternal Wanderer's consciousness both focused on emergency displays showing critical system failures throughout the vessel. "What's happening?" Jake asked, struggling to clear his mind of the fog that had settled over his thoughts. "The containment fields around the void-touched areas are destabilizing faster than anticipated," explained, her mental voice tight with concern. "The entropy corruption is more aggressive than we calculated. We have perhaps 2 hours before complete cascade failure." Jake forced himself upright, despite the fact that his neural pathways still felt raw from the previous session. "Then we finish this now." "Jake, your brain hasn't had sufficient time to recover. Another neural interface session could cause permanent damage or death." "And if I don't try, 1 billion people die anyway." Jake moved toward the interface pod with determination that surprised even him. "Sometimes you don't get to choose the safe option." The ship's consciousness spoke with something that might have been admiration. "Your species possesses a remarkable willingness to sacrifice for others. It is a trait we have observed in few sentient races." "Maybe that's because most species are smart enough to know when something is impossible." Jake settled into the interface pod, feeling the familiar positioning of the neural filaments. "Let's see if human stubbornness can make up for lack of common sense." The final neural interface session began with Jake's consciousness immediately expanding into the ship's networks, but this time the sensation was different. His previous sessions had left permanent changes in his neural structure, creating pathways that allowed for faster and deeper integration with the bioneural systems. "Your mind adapts quickly," the Eternal Wanderer observed as Jake's awareness spread throughout the quantum matrix chamber. "You are accessing system levels that typically require years of training." Jake focused his enhanced perception on the damaged matrix, seeing it now not just as a broken mechanism, but as a wounded piece of reality itself. The containment fields he had constructed around the void-touched areas pulsed with contained entropy, holding back forces that sought to unmake the very concept of existence. "Begin with the foundation structure," guided him. "The new matrix must be built from quantum bedrock that cannot be corrupted by entropy effects." Working with methodical precision, Jake began constructing the base framework of the replacement matrix. Each quantum crystal had to be grown at the molecular level, its structure mathematically perfect to withstand the forces it would channel. But this was more than just precise construction. It was an act of creation that required him to impose order on the fundamental chaos of quantum space. As he worked, Jake became aware of the billion minds sleeping in the pocket dimensions, their dreams flowing through the partially repaired quantum matrices like ghost songs at the edge of perception. They were counting on him, trusting their survival to a human engineer who had learned to work miracles through sheer determination. "The primary resonance chambers are complete," Jake reported after what felt like hours of concentrated effort. "Beginning integration with the stellar core." This was the most delicate phase of the construction. The matrix had to be perfectly aligned with the heart of stars, creating a quantum bridge that could channel stellar energy while maintaining the pocket dimensions. Any misalignment would result in catastrophic failure. Jake extended his consciousness toward the stellar core, feeling its immense power like standing next to a controlled nuclear explosion. The energy patterns were complex beyond description, requiring him to guide them through quantum pathways that existed in 12-dimensional space. Careful, the ship warned. The stellar core's output has been fluctuating since the containment fields began destabilizing. You must compensate for irregular energy flows. Jake adjusted the matrix structure in real time, creating dynamic resonance patterns that could adapt to the changing energy output. It was like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster, requiring split-second timing and perfect coordination between his enhanced consciousness and the ship's systems. Integration at 60%, announced. 70%, 80%. Suddenly, one of the containment fields around the void-touched corruption began to fail. Entropy energies leaked into the quantum substrate, threatening to corrupt the new matrix Jake was constructing. The containment is collapsing. The Eternal Wanderer's mental voice carried urgent alarm. Abort the integration. No, Jake said, his consciousness fighting to maintain control of the failing systems. We're too close. I can compensate. Drawing on reserves of will he didn't know he possessed, Jake began rerouting the matrix construction around the spreading entropy corruption. It was like performing surgery while the patient was bleeding out, requiring him to seal off corrupted pathways while simultaneously completing the quantum integration. The strain was enormous. Jake could feel his neural pathways beginning to overload, but he pushed through the growing pain and confusion. The billion sleeping minds in the pocket dimensions were depending on him, and he would not let them down. Integration at 90%, called out. Jake, your neural activity is approaching dangerous levels. Almost there, Jake muttered, his consciousness spread across quantum structures that spanned multiple dimensions. Just need to. The final connection snapped into place with a sensation like the universe itself exhaling. The fourth quantum matrix came online, its crystalline structure blazing with contained starlight as it established stable links to the pocket dimensions. But the effort had cost Jake everything. His consciousness began fragmenting as his overtaxed neural pathways started shutting down. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, he felt the bioneural filaments beginning their emergency disconnection sequence. Jake's mental voice seemed to come from very far away. Stay with us. Jake's last coherent thought before the darkness took him was of profound satisfaction. The matrix was complete. The billion sleeping souls would survive. He had kept a vow that wasn't even his own. When Jake regained consciousness, he found himself in the ship's medical bay with Hovering anxiously nearby. Her scanners showed that his neural pathways had been severely damaged by the final interface session, but the medical systems were working to repair the damage. How long was I unconscious? Jake asked, his voice hoarse and uncertain. 3 days, replied, relief evident in her mental voice. The bioneural trauma was severe. For a time, we were not certain you would recover. Jake tried to sit up and found that his coordination was sluggish, his thoughts moving through what felt like thick syrup. The matrix, did it work? Perfectly. All 4 quantum matrices are now fully operational, and the pocket dimensions are completely stable. You have saved my people, Jake. The Eternal Wanderer's consciousness joined their conversation. More than that, your repair work has restored my full functionality. We can now leave this world and continue our search for a new home for the refugees. Jake absorbed this news with mixed emotions. Success felt good, but he was also aware of profound changes in his own consciousness. The neural interface sessions had left permanent alterations in his brain structure, expanding his perception in ways that made normal human existence seem flat and limited. What happens now? He asked. Now we face a choice, said. The Eternal Wanderer is fully repaired and can travel at faster-than-light speeds. We can take the refugees to any of several suitable worlds I have identified, but our departure would leave you stranded on Earth with no way to return to your people. Jake considered this. What's the alternative? You could come with us. Your enhanced neural pathways make you uniquely qualified to work with our technology. You could help establish the new colony, use your engineering skills to build a civilization from scratch. The offer was tempting. Jake could feel the vast possibilities that existed beyond Earth, the wonders he could see and worlds he could help build. But he also thought about his old life, his job, his family, the simple pleasures of human existence that he was only now realizing he might never experience the same way again. Can I think about it? Of course, but know that whatever you decide, you will always have our gratitude. You risked everything for people you had never met, for a civilization not your own. That speaks to something noble in your species' character. Over the next few days, as Jake's strength returned, he explored more of the ship and met some of the refugees who had been awakened from their pocket dimension stasis. They were gracious and welcoming, expressing profound gratitude for his sacrifice. Their technology and knowledge far exceeded anything on Earth, and they offered to share it freely if he chose to remain with them. But Jake found himself drawn repeatedly to the ship's observation deck, where he could look out at the familiar desert landscape of Nevada. Earth looked different to his enhanced vision. He could see the energy patterns that flowed through living systems, the quantum foundations that supported matter itself. It was beautiful in ways he had never imagined. Yet it was still home. "I've made my decision," Jake announced to the Eternal Wanderer during what he knew would be their final council session. And asked, though her mental voice suggested she already knew his choice. "I'm staying. Earth is my home, and my people need someone who understands what's possible. Your technology, your knowledge. Maybe I can help humanity prepare for the day when we're ready to join the galactic community." Nodded with understanding. A wise choice, and perhaps not as limiting as you might think. "What do you mean?" "The neural modifications you have cannot be reversed, but they can be enhanced. With the proper equipment, you could maintain limited contact with our people even across interstellar distances." She gestured to a small crystalline device that materialized in her hands. "This quantum communicator is attuned to your specific neural patterns. Once per year, when the dimensional barriers are thinnest, you will be able to reach across space and speak with us." Jake accepted the device, feeling its alien weight in his hands. "Thank you for everything." "It is we who should thank you," the Eternal Wanderer said. "You have given us back our future. In the chronicles of our people, your name will be remembered alongside the greatest heroes of the Eternal Dominion." "Just remember to tell them I was a pretty good engineer," Jake said with a smile. On the night before the Eternal Wanderer's departure, Jake stood in the Nevada desert watching the alien ship prepare for its journey to the stars. The vessel's bioluminescent hull pulsed with renewed energy, and he could feel the excitement of the billion refugees as they contemplated their coming freedom. Emerged from the ship to bid him farewell, her regal bearing by the simple traveling clothes she now wore. In the starlight, she looked every inch the Empress she was, but also like a friend saying goodbye. "Will you be happy," Jake asked, "in your new world?" "Happiness is a luxury we gave up when the Devourers came," replied. "But we will be safe. Our children will grow up free. That is enough." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally turned to face him. "Before I go, I want you to know something. The vow I made to my people, it was not just about survival. I promised them that somewhere in the universe, we would find beings worthy of friendship, species that shared our values of cooperation and sacrifice. In you, Jake, I have fulfilled that vow as well." The Eternal Wanderer lifted off an hour before dawn, its bioluminescent hull growing brighter as it rose through Earth's atmosphere. Jake watched until it became just another star among the countless points of light scattered across the sky. As the sun rose over the Nevada desert, Jake began the long walk back to civilization. His enhanced consciousness allowed him to perceive the world around him in ways no human had ever experienced, but his heart remained entirely human. He had work to do, a future to build, and a species to prepare for the wonders that awaited them among the stars. 5 years had passed since the Eternal Wanderer disappeared into the star-filled Nevada sky, and Jake had become a very different man. The neural modifications from his time interfacing with alien technology had left him permanently changed, able to perceive reality in ways that normal human consciousness couldn't comprehend. But rather than retreating from the world, he had chosen to use his enhanced abilities to quietly revolutionize human engineering. Jake's consulting firm, Quantum Solutions, occupied an unremarkable office building in Las Vegas, but the work being done inside was anything but ordinary. Using principles derived from his experience with technology, Jake had developed new approaches to structural engineering, materials science, and energy systems that seemed impossibly advanced by current human standards. His clients thought he was simply a brilliant engineer with an intuitive grasp of cutting-edge physics. They had no idea that their breakthrough designs were actually versions of technology that was commonplace among galactic civilizations. Jake was careful to introduce innovations gradually, allowing humanity to absorb and understand each advancement before moving on to the next. The morning that would change everything began like any other. Jake was reviewing designs for a new type of fusion reactor that would appear to be a natural evolution of current technology, when his enhanced senses detected something that made him look up sharply from his work. The quantum communicator that had given him was activating for the first time since he'd received it. Jake hurried to his private laboratory, a room shielded from electronic surveillance and designed to contain the various alien artifacts he'd been gradually developing for human use. The crystalline device was pulsing with soft light, indicating an incoming transmission across the vast emptiness of interstellar space. He pressed his palm against the communicator's surface, and immediately his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of Earth, reaching across light years to touch another mind. Jake's mental voice carried warmth and relief. "It is good to hear your thoughts again. How are your people? Did you find a suitable world?" "More than suitable. The planet we have claimed orbits a stable star in what your astronomers call the system. We have named it New, and our civilization flourishes there. The pocket dimension refugees have been successfully relocated to the planetary surface, and our population is growing once again." Jake felt profound satisfaction at this news. "I'm glad. You deserve peace after everything you've endured." "Peace, yes, but also purpose, which is why I am contacting you now. We face a new challenge, one that requires the unique perspective you provided during our repairs." Jake's attention sharpened. "What kind of challenge?" "The Devourer swarm has not been idle since our escape. Our long-range sensors indicate that they have consumed the entirety of the Andromeda galaxy and are now turning their attention toward the Milky Way. They will reach the outer spiral arms within 50 of your years." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. 50 years wasn't much time on a galactic scale, but it represented the entirety of humanity's current space age. Earth's civilization was nowhere near ready to face a threat that had consumed entire galaxies. "What can be done?" Jake asked. "A coalition of surviving species has formed, the last refugees from a dozen galaxies that have fallen to the swarm. We call ourselves the Final Alliance, and we are preparing to make a stand here in the Milky Way. But we need every advantage we can gather, including human engineering. Your species' approach to problem-solving has proven remarkably effective. Where other civilizations see insurmountable challenges, humans see opportunities for innovation. We need that perspective in our war against entropy itself." Jake absorbed this request, understanding its implications. "You're asking me to leave Earth?" "Not permanently. We propose to establish a research facility in your solar system, disguised as natural phenomena to avoid alarming your governments. You could work with our scientists while remaining close to your home world. And as the project progresses, we could gradually introduce other humans to our technology." The offer was tempting, but Jake had learned to be cautious about alien proposals that seemed too good to be true. "What makes you think humanity is ready for this? We can barely manage interplanetary travel." "Because of you," replied simply. "In the 5 years since our parting, we have monitored the technological developments emerging from your world. The fusion reactors, the quantum computing advances, the materials science breakthroughs, they all bear the hallmarks of principles you learned during our time together." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had been careful to introduce alien concepts gradually, disguising them as human innovations. "You've been watching." "Observing from a distance, yes. Your approach has been admirably subtle. Rather than shocking your civilization with impossible technology, you have chosen to guide them toward discoveries they can understand and accept. It shows wisdom beyond your years. And now you want me to accelerate that process. The Devourer swarm will not wait for humanity to naturally evolve to the point where they can contribute to galactic defense. We need to compress centuries of development into decades, and your people's adaptability makes them ideal candidates for such rapid advancement. Jake considered the proposal, his enhanced consciousness allowing him to process implications and possibilities at superhuman speed. What would this research facility actually do? Develop new approaches to combating entropy-based weapons. The swarm's primary advantage is their ability to corrupt matter at the quantum level, converting ordered systems into chaos. Traditional defenses have proven inadequate, but your experience containing void-touched corruption suggests alternative approaches. The memory of his final neural interface session came flooding back. The delicate work of building quantum containment fields around areas where reality itself had been damaged. You think human engineering principles could be scaled up to defend against the swarm? We think human engineering principles, combined with advanced galactic technology and the unique perspective of your enhanced consciousness, could produce solutions that neither of our species could develop alone. Jake found himself nodding even as part of his mind recoiled from the magnitude of what was being proposed. When would this begin? The advanced ships of the Final Alliance are already en route to your solar system. They will establish the research facility within the asteroid belt, disguised as a natural formation. If you agree to participate, transportation can be arranged within the next month. Jake looked around his laboratory at the carefully hidden alien artifacts and the designs that would guide humanity's technological development for the next decade. He had built a life here, had found ways to help his species prepare for their eventual emergence into galactic society. But the Devourer swarm would make all of that irrelevant if they couldn't be stopped. I need time to arrange things here. My current projects, the people who depend on my work. Of course, take whatever time you need. But remember, every day we delay is another day closer to the swarm's arrival in our galaxy. The communication ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and a decision that would affect the future of not just humanity, but all sentient life in the Milky Way. Over the next week, Jake carefully arranged for the continuation of his work in his absence. His most trusted associates received detailed instructions for implementing the next phase of technological developments, though they had no idea they were following a roadmap derived from alien science. He established trust funds and research grants that would ensure critical projects continued even if he never returned. Most importantly, he composed a series of sealed documents that would only be opened in the event of his death. They contained detailed information about humanity's place in the galactic community, the threat of the Devourer swarm, and complete technical specifications for the alien technologies he had been gradually introducing. If something happened to him, at least his knowledge wouldn't die with him. On the appointed day, Jake drove into the Nevada desert to the same site where he had first encountered crashed ship. As the sun set behind the red rock formations, a shimmer appeared in the air above the impact crater. The shimmer resolved into the familiar form of a transport vessel, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with subdued light. Emerged from the ship as Jake approached, and he was struck by how she had changed during their years apart. Her regal bearing remained, but there was something new in her bearing, a sense of purpose that transcended personal loss or gain. She wore what appeared to be military dress, though made of the same flowing materials he remembered. "You came," she said simply. "You knew I would. I hoped. Your species' capacity for self-sacrifice continues to amaze us." Jake looked at the transport vessel, nodding its sleek lines and obvious technological sophistication. What exactly am I getting myself into? A war unlike any fought in galactic history. The Final Alliance represents the combined knowledge and technology of over 200 species, but we face an enemy that has consumed entire galaxies. The odds of success are, she paused, not encouraging. But you think it can be done? I think it must be done, and I believe that human creativity, combined with the resources of galactic civilization, might provide the advantage we need. Jake nodded and stepped toward the transport. Then let's go save the galaxy. The journey to the research facility took only minutes at faster-than-light speeds, but the destination took Jake's breath away. The facility was built into a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and converted into a technological marvel. From the outside, it appeared completely natural, but the interior contained laboratories and workshops that surpassed anything Jake had imagined. Representatives from dozens of species worked side by side. Their varied forms and abilities focused on the single goal of developing defenses against the devourer swarm. Jake was introduced to crystalline beings who thought in geometric harmonies, energy entities that existed as pure consciousness, and mechanical species that had transcended biological existence entirely. "Welcome to Sanctuary Station," said as they toured the facility, "the last hope of free civilization." Jake's first assignment was to work with a team studying captured swarm artifacts, fragments of corrupted matter that had been carefully contained within quantum isolation chambers. The material was unlike anything in normal physics, seeming to exist in a state of controlled chaos that conventional analysis. Using his experience with void-touched corruption, Jake began developing new approaches to containment and analysis. His methods were radically different from those used by other species, focusing on dynamic adaptation rather than static resistance. While traditional defenses tried to prevent entropy corruption through rigid barriers, Jake's designs allowed for controlled corruption that could be channeled and redirected. "It's like controlled demolition," Jake explained to his alien colleagues during one of their research sessions. "Instead of trying to stop an avalanche, we create channels that direct its flow away from what we want to protect." The concept was revolutionary for species that had spent trying to build stronger defenses against the swarm. Jake's approach suggested that the enemy's strength could be turned against them, that chaos could be harnessed and redirected rather than simply resisted. Within months, Jake's team had developed prototype devices that could create entropy sinks, areas of controlled corruption that would absorb and neutralize swarm attacks. The technology was still experimental, but early tests showed promise. As the project progressed, Jake found himself at the center of a growing network of human-alien collaboration. His enhanced consciousness allowed him to interface directly with alien technology and thought patterns, making him an ideal translator between human concepts and galactic science. Other humans were gradually introduced to the project, as Jake identified individuals with the necessary skills and psychological flexibility. Engineers, physicists, mathematicians, and computer scientists were recruited through carefully orchestrated, chance, encounters and breakthrough discoveries that led them to develop the enhanced consciousness needed for galactic-level collaboration. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Several times, experiments with swarm artifacts nearly resulted in catastrophic containment failures. But gradually, the alliance between human innovation and galactic technology began producing results that neither could have achieved alone. 2 years into the project, Jake stood in the main observatory of Sanctuary Station, watching long-range sensor displays that showed the devourer swarm's inexorable advance toward the Milky Way. The enemy had consumed the satellite galaxies and was now probing the outer spiral arms. "They'll be here within 20 years, said, joining him at the observation port. "Less if they encounter significant resistance and adapt their tactics." "Are we ready?" The entropy sink technology has been successfully tested on a planetary scale. Production facilities are being established throughout the galaxy. But Jake, she paused, her mental voice carrying uncertainty. "The swarm is vast beyond comprehension. Even if our defenses work perfectly, we can only slow their advance. True victory will require something more." Jake nodded, understanding the implications. "A weapon, something that can actually destroy them rather than just redirecting their attacks." "Yes, and that is where we need your people's greatest strength, the ability to think beyond conventional limitations." Jake looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in that vast darkness, an unstoppable force of entropy was advancing toward everything he held dear. But for the first time since learning of the swarm's existence, he felt something that might have been hope. Humanity had always been good at the impossible. It was time to prove that to the galaxy.